Oh my goodness, what did I even just read? 5 months ago, I made a commitment to do a video series on The Way of Kings, where I broke down the story as I was reading it in order to analyze it in as real time as possible. Yeah, I just totally ignored that for the last 30 chapters of Way of Kings. Honestly, if I'm honest, I just completely forgot to make a video. It just got so good, and I just got so into it that I just powered through to the end without even thinking twice about it. So good, so stinking good. Oh man, and I'm so torn because if you watch the first video in this series, I said some things. I kind of indicated I didn't like it very much. I was a very foolish person. I was quite childish, you might say. But thankfully, I have put away childish things and am now obsessed with The Way of Kings in the Stormlight Archive. I still do believe that some of the book is entirely too long, that there is stuff that could be cut without losing a lot of the plot, that there are some scenes that are just a little bit bloated. But I understand what Brandon Sanderson's doing now, which I didn't quite get before, is that he is not just making a story for us to enjoy, he is building a world for us to delve into and experience and really ask as many questions as we can and to try to make the world as real as possible. And that's why he includes things like a lot of descriptions and the interludes and just a lot of extra scenes with the characters that might not have been needed in a traditional 500-page history fantasy book. But I appreciate it because he is doing something that few other fantasy authors are doing, and that is making a world that is just so believable. This has a story that feels real, characters that feel real, and a mythology that feels real, and a magic system that is believable. But the thing that makes The Way of Kings special is the thematic conclusion to the story. Now, if you're watching this, I assume that you've read Way of Kings. If you haven't, you absolutely have to stop this video now, just because I'm about to spoil one of the best scenes I've read in probably 10 and 15 years in just literature as a whole. So stories need to wrap up well. If the beginning of a story is amazing, but the ending just fizzles, people won't remember the beginning of the story. This book actually has a little bit of the opposite of that problem. The beginning does start well, but the characters are a little bit depressed, and there's a lot of exposition and world building and things that might turn an audience off. You follow the story of Kaladin, a dark-eyed bridgeman who's basically the lowest of the low, worse than a slave, and he has an obsessive hatred towards the Light Eyes for the various things that light-eyed people have done to himself and his family, including some of the worst betrayals he's ever seen. He is of the understanding that all Light Eyes are without honor, and that any Light Eyes that seems to be with honor is just putting on a face, that there are no honorable Light Eyes in this world. And this is what Kaladin believes in the innermost parts of his soul. He builds his whole worldview on this assumption. On the opposite side of the story spectrum, we have Dalinar, who is one of the main high princes. He's the uncle of the king. And there's a lot about him that we don't know about in the first book, but we do know that he's a man who tries his best to live with honor. He tries to be honorable when other people aren't. He tries to live by a code and by the book The Way of Kings, which has taught him how to be a better man, a better soldier, a better ruler, especially in a world where warfare is treasured by his people group. He's trying to find a way to keep honor to his society, to keep the kingdom that he serves unified, and also keep peace, which is a concept very foreign again to his people. Dalinar represents pretty much the highest point of society, and Kaladin represents one of the lowest points of society. In the scene that is probably the best scene, again, I've read in 10, 15 years, and you know what I'm gonna mention, is the scene where Kaladin's worldview is flipped upside down when he expects to be betrayed by Light Eyes once again, when he expects Dalinar to turn his back on his promise to basically save him and his fellow bridgemen from Sadeas, the other High Prince. And Dalinar trades his Shardblade, the weapon that is worth kingdoms, that is priceless, to Sadeas for Kaladin, Bridgefor, and all the other living bridgemen. Because in his eyes, that is the honorable thing to do. He considers mankind, human souls, priceless. And in his words, a Shardblade is priceless, human souls are priceless. It's an even swap. And Kaladin is completely dumbfounded. Light Eyes don't act this way. He knows the Light Eyes don't act this way. And yet here's a Light Eyes who is actually acting with honor and acting on it, in saving Kaladin and his men. And if that just doesn't give you chills while reading it, oh man. That, more than any other scene in the story, just had me, wanting to jump and holler and whoop and just be so excited. Because thematically, the story drove to a point that was emotionally satisfying, it satisfied character arcs, it satisfied the plot, and it was just, oh man, I don't even have the words to talk about how great this scene was. Theme is just the most important part of the story. I mean, you can make a lot of assumptions about story. You can say, you know, plot is the most important thing, characters are the most important thing, word choice, dialogue. I tend to believe the character is the most important thing in story. But this story, The Way of Kings, taught me the true importance of having a theme that the author executes to perfection. I could have done with a few less descriptions of the woman's hair being done up in some complex weave or the men's jackets being buttoned down on the sides every other chapter. There are things that I would change, but Brandon Sanderson is a master at theming. He showed that in Mistborn, and he has shown that again now, and I can't wait to get into the rest of Brandon Sanderson's books because he tells stories that are believable and with endings that you don't see coming, but he puts all the clues there, and he builds it up in such a way to make you say yes. And the clues totally were there. Sadeas didn't have a sharp blade, and we knew that in the story. You know, we knew that Dalinar and Kaladin, who were, you know, the epitome of two different beliefs, would have to come together and meet in somehow. But I never thought that it would come to the point with Dalinar actually having to, you know, make an action so strong that would make the rest of the story so believable. We buy into Dalinar's story so much more, his arc, who he is, because of his actions. He has shown in his story to Kaladin and to us, as the audience, that he truly is a man of honor. No, there's a lot more of the Stormlight Archive. Book 3 focuses on Dalinar's backstory, and I'm sure there'll be some really interesting things there that'll make the scene with the Shard Blade even that more interesting. But for now, just a thematic execution of the end of the book was second to none. So anyway, there are so many things I could talk about Way of Kings, but it's all pointless compared to that scene. So I'm just gonna wrap up my Way of Kings analysis series with this video. I do plan on continuing the series with Words of Radiance and Oathbringer and possibly Rhythm of War. And I have a few other ideas for a continuing Stormlight Archive series in the future. But if you haven't yet, as always, make sure to check out my co-hosts for Stormalong 2020, Michael Knipp, Victoria from Musical Bookworm, Christy Lewis from Dostoevsky in Space. They all have awesome channels, do some great videos on Stormlight Archive and just books in general. We talk about Stormlight Archive every other Thursday for most of the rest of 2020 until Rhythm of War comes out. And we just want to talk about this crazy world of you guys. It's brought so many lovers of literature and lovers of fantasy, even people who didn't like fantasy before, into the mix. And we'd just love to have you join us as we continue talking about Stormlight Archive. I'll include the Stormlight Archive analysis playlist on the screen here. And guys, thank you so much for joining me on this journey through Way of Kings. It's been a blast, and I know there's a lot of you who keep saying, you know, just wait, there's some great things coming. And for any of you who encourage me to keep reading, thank you for doing so. The ending of this book was just a blast, and I cannot wait to keep reading and see what comes next.